So I'm Jo Fearman, Operations Manager at NRM North, and have previously been the TEER Program Manager over the last couple of years. I'm going to talk to you about our Tamar Estuary and Esk Rivers program. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the system as a whole, and then talk about our work in the TEER program and some of the future activities that we've got planned. Some of this information has already been covered by other speakers, but just briefly, many of you will be familiar with the TEER catchment. It's 10,000 square kilometres and it drains 15% of Tasmania through 5 major river systems, including the North Esk, the South Esk, the Macquarie, the Brumbies River and Lake River, and the Meander catchment. So a really large catchment. Obviously, you know, when we consider some of the catchments Ted was talking about earlier, it's quite a small catchment, but for Tasmania, it's the largest catchment that we have. It also is the location of our second largest population in Launceston here, and the catchment is mostly agriculture and forests. So that's the catchment. If we zoom in to the estuary, similar information to what Dave was sharing with you, it is the longest navigable estuary in Australia, and we've heard all about how it's a drowned river valley that formed when sea level rose. The depth in the estuary is quite variable, and obviously up to 53 metres in some areas, and it has quite a large tidal range, and that tidal range is amplified up the estuary. So down at Low Head, the tidal range is 2 to 3 metres. As you move in towards Launceston, the tidal range increases to 3 to 4 metres. And what we end up with is an asymmetrical tide, where the incoming tide is stronger and faster than the outgoing tide. If you look there, we've got the 5 different zones of the estuary that we use when we're monitoring and reporting on waterway health, with zones 1 to 3 being estuarine zones and zones 4 and 5 being marine zones. We've heard a lot about our natural values in the estuary, and obviously Dave has given us a great overview of a range of important species. We've got a number of vulnerable endangered species, we've got endemic species, and we've got a really diverse range of habitats that support those species. That's within the estuary and also within the catchment. We've got important wetlands and riparian areas that support important natural values. But obviously there are a lot of important human use values within the system as well. There are multiple drinking water offtakes within the catchment. The water is used to produce hydroelectricity. It's used for irrigation in the catchment. And there are tourism and shipping uses within the estuary. And of course, we all appreciate the amenity and the views within the system. It's a beautiful natural system that we have. But as we've already heard, it's not a pristine system. It's not what it was pre-European settlement. It is heavily modified. There are a number of areas where we've reclaimed land and filled in wetlands. There was an extensive period of dredging in the upper estuary. There's been land use change in the catchment, changes to flow regimes. We've got introduced species like rice grass that have modified the estuary. And then we've got pollutant inputs that we need to manage in terms of point source pollutants from sewage and stormwater, impacts from historical mining in the catchment, and impacts from agricultural uses. This is an example here of Hunter's Cut, where at the time the Marine Board wanted to straighten out the estuary, make it more easy to navigate, and spend a lot of money investing in a channel that would straighten out the estuary. Unfortunately, it filled in and it was unsuccessful in modifying the estuary, but it's an example of how people have tried to modify the estuary over time. In terms of pollutant inputs, there are a range of different pollutants that are common in our waterways. There are obviously nutrient inputs that come from a range of sources, urban and catchment sources, and elevated levels of nutrients can result in nuisance algal growth and algal blooms, and they can then impact on our native aquatic plants and animals. They can smother those. If we end up with algal blooms that are toxic, that can impact on recreation and drinking water quality. So, we need to be managing for nutrient inputs. Inputs of sediment into the system can also impact on water quality. So they, you can see it, they make the water look dirty, but those sediments can then impact on the penetration of light into the water column. They can smother native plants, and sediments within the water column can damage the gills of fish and other aquatic animals. So, need to be managing and reducing sediment inputs into our water column. And obviously, there's a lot of focus on pathogens within the TEER system, given our combined sewage and stormwater system that is designed to overflow after certain size rain events, and you'll hear all about the combined system later on in the afternoon. But certainly decreasing pathogen inputs, obviously from the combined system, also from the catchment, is really important because pathogens can make people sick, and so they're the types of pollutants that we've sort of looked at in terms of pollutant loads and what we can do to improve water quality. So that's just a snapshot of the system. I'll talk to you a little bit about the Tamar Estuary and Esk Rivers program. So the TEER program, as we call it, was formed in 2008, and it's a voluntary regional partnership that brings together a range of different agencies that are responsible for managing our waterways. The purpose of the program is to produce science and evidence that can inform decision making and to take a coordinated approach to management from the catchment through the coast. And we've got a really large range of partners that contribute funding or contribute their scientific and technical expertise to ensure that the science and the monitoring and the research that we do is robust and useful in terms of informing management. Some of the work that we do in the TEER program, we've really focused on monitoring and reporting. We have 16 different monitoring sites throughout the estuary, and we go and collect water quality samples every month and use that data to produce a report card. So every 2 years we produce a report card that shows how water quality is changing in the estuary over time. We also undertake monitoring for algal blooms in Lake Trevellyn over the summer months, where there has historically been an algal bloom many years ago in Lake Trevellyn, and so we regularly monitor over summer as an early detection system or to detect for risks of algal blooms over summer. We do specific scientific investigations on topical issues in collaboration with our partners, and some of the work that we've done is around bacteria and pathogens, seafood safety, fecal source tracking, and obviously most recently on sedimentation. And we also work with Northern Tasmanian Stormwater Working Group, and we facilitate training and capacity building for industry and for councils to improve stormwater quality and improve the way that sediment and erosion is managed within our urban areas. But probably the most substantial piece of work that the TEER program has produced is the Water Quality Improvement Plan, which was released in 2015, so it's a while ago now, but it was a really extensive piece of work by the TEER program, and I'll speak to that in just a moment. But just to touch on the 2020 Tamar Estuary report card for those who haven't yet seen it. We're due to release a new report card in 2022, but in terms of water quality in the estuary in 2020. You can see this graph here shows you the change in grade over time in each of the zones. So the darkest blue is the 2020 report card grade, and you can see that compared to 2018 there was an improvement in water quality in all the zones of the estuary. And really there are two main influences or factors that contribute to that improvement in water quality. The first one is that the 2018 report card, the previous 2 years, was still heavily impacted by the effects of the 2016 flood. So there was a huge volume of water that came through with the 2016 flood, resuspended a lot of sediment and impacted on dissolved oxygen and other pollutants. And so the effect of the 2016 flood was still continuing when we released the 2018 report card. By the time we produced the 2020 report card, the effects of that flood had diminished and the water quality had improved and recovered from that impact. The other major influence that saw an improvement in water quality in 2020 was the fact that the sediment raking program had ceased in 2019, and so there was no longer a regular stirring up of sediment and resuspension of the associated pollutants that are in the sediment. And so both of those factors meant that by our 2020 report card, water quality had improved throughout the estuary, which is quite positive. But back to our water quality improvement plan that was produced in 2015. The water quality improvement plan was an extensive piece of work and really looked at all the different sources and the loads of pollutants that go into the whole catchment, and what are the feasible actions that we can undertake to improve water quality and reduce pollutant loads. So it was produced over a number of years with extensive community consultation, and it really is a planning blueprint for improving water quality in the whole system. And the modelling in the water quality improvement plan effectively underpins the investment plan that is the River Health Action Plan. And a number of people will speak to the River Health Action Plan today, so I won't go into that. But the planning and the science that is included in the water quality improvement plan really is the basis for informing future management and improvements in river health. Obviously, the River Health Action Plan is a piece of work that is owned by the Tamar Estuary Management Task Force, and so there are a lot of questions about who's the Tamar Estuary Management Task Force and how do they interact or work with the Tamar Estuary and Esk Rivers program. What's the difference between the two? And so really the TEER program that we manage is really focused on the science. It's our role to monitor and report on waterway health, to understand the condition of the system, and to produce evidence that informs decision making. The Tamar Estuary Management Task Force are really focused on developing policy recommendations and then attracting the investment to actually implement the particular improvements or policy recommendations that we would go forward with. So really, TEER is focused on the science and TEMPT is focused on policy and investment. But obviously they're quite interrelated, and the work is all focused on the Tamar Estuary and the system as a whole. And so there is a positive working relationship between the two. So in terms of the TEER program, some of the things that we've identified for our future work, we'll continue to undertake our water quality monitoring in the estuary and in Lake Trevally, but probably relevant to some of the questions that came up after Dave's talk are around biological monitoring and ecosystem health, and what do we know about different species that live in different areas of the estuary. We don't currently undertake that monitoring, and so what we would like to do, and what we're currently in the process of doing, is scoping up a biological monitoring program so that we can not just understand changes in water quality, but have a better understanding of the ecosystem as a whole, and the health of the ecosystem and how it changes over time. Another important piece of work that we've prioritised for the future is to produce a freshwater report card. So in 2013, the TEER program produced a freshwater report card looking at a snapshot of waterway health throughout the catchment, and we'd like to revisit that freshwater report card and produce another one looking at, given all the investment that's going into managing the catchment and improving our management practices in the catchment, what is the status of our rivers and the health of our rivers in the catchment. So we'll be looking to do another freshwater report card as well. And of course, there are always topical issues that need an investigation or scientific evidence to support decision making, and we'll continue to provide that kind of support to people who make decisions about our waterways. So that's my presentation, but happy to